Hello, you're welcome to Kema Freak. My name is Kemi Omorugbe. In this video, we're doing something really exciting. We're making a shirt dress. Finally. This is like my most requested video ever, especially since I made a video on how to fix a shirt collar. People were like, why don't you make a video on how to make a shirt dress? So I listened and here we are. I'm sure it's going to be a fun ride. I'll be making use of two different types of fabric and we'll be cutting patches. I'm sure I must have inserted a video or a picture somewhere on the screen where you can see what we are aiming for. So we're starting with the pattern drafting and then we'll cut and we'll move ahead to stitch like we usually do. So let's get right into it. Hold on. If you're yet to subscribe to this channel, do so right away because you're missing something really good. And give this video a thumbs up. Click on the notification bell and everything clickable in between. This is what I'm passionate about and I'll be happy to have you on the ride with us. So let's get right to work. For this project, you'll be needing a pattern paper, your curve and ruler, and your fabric of choice. And you'll also be making use of a paper stay or a collar stay for the collar. Okay, so on the shirt dress we're making, we'll be attaching a shirt collar. And you also have a placket along the center front for button attachment. Also, we'll be extending the back piece to form the top 1 inch of the front piece. I don't know if this makes sense, but then I'll explain further when we get to the table. It's just what you see regularly in male clothing, where the shoulder joining forms a part of the front of the shirt. To achieve this, the front piece will be 1 inch shorter than the length you're aiming for, while the back piece will be 2 inches longer than the length of the front. Now I've marked out a margin at the top of my paper. Next I'll be taking out 2 inches at the center front and reeling it out. This extension will be used to create the placket for button attachment. Now I'll be folding in that 2 inches because I'm not going to be working on it yet and I want my neckline to be even when I cut. So I'll just fold this in and assume it's not even there at all. Remember that I mentioned that the back will form part of the front piece. Okay, so that extension will be 1 inch long. Hence, I'll be subtracting 1 inch from all the vertical measurements before marking it out on paper. So I'm just taking out my neckline width of 3.5 inches and depth of 2.5 inches instead of 3.5 inches. That's because of the extra 1 inch coming from the back. Next, from the center front, I'll mark the shoulder width divided by 2. And in this case, I'm making use of a shoulder width of 15 inches. When divided by 2, I have 7.5. So at the edge of the shoulder point there, I slanted my shoulder by 1 inch. And I'll be connecting that to the edge of the front neckline and creating the neckline curve like so. Now I subtracted 1 inch from my regular half length and marking it out on paper. Remember that extra 1 inch coming from the back, so it affects all the vertical measurements. So here is the waistline and I'll do the same thing to the hip line. Now I'm marking out the hip line 8 inches below the waistline. Now we have the hip line. So next I'll be measuring the full length of the shirt dress. For this I made use of a length of 40 inches and I just subtracted 1 from that and marked out 39 inches because of that extra 1 inch again. Sorry that this part isn't too clear, but then I'm marking out my chest line. So ideally I'll have made use of 7.5 inches, the same measurement I used for the shoulder length, but then remember the 1 inch coming from the back, so I marked 6.5 inches instead. So from the shoulder drop I'm marking out this line and creating the chest line at that point. Now I'll be marking out the horizontal circumferences divided by 4. So from the center front, I marked out the bust circumference divided by 4, that is 10 inches, because the bust circumference I'm working with is 40 inches. And now you need to decide if you want a straight shirt dress or you want something a little bit curvy on the waistline. So I just left that as straight for now. And on the hip line, I marked out the hip circumference divided by 4. On all of these measurements, I'll be adding half an inch is allowance to give the dress a little bit of freedom. So if you're going for something straight, just rule a straight line from the chest line to the hip line and straight to the hem of the shirt dress. So I use the same measurements for the hip line and the hem of the dress. So if you're going for something shapy, you will need to take your waist circumference divided by 4, adding an extra half an inch for ease and connecting it like I'm doing right now. So from this line I just drew, I'll be marking out a curve to the hip line. So this is if you want something curvy, you're not going for a straight shirt dress. Be sure you don't have any sharp edge. So I'm using my curve to smoothen out the waistline. Now, because I want something curvy at the hem of the dress, I'll be marking out 5 inches upward and creating an S-shaped curve like this. This just has a way of making it look sweet and beautiful. That's all. Now I can cut out this pattern. I actually forgot to create the armhole curve, so I'll be doing that in between. Now from the midpoint of the armhole line, I'll be marking out the armhole curve like this. Now we'll be moving on to create the back pattern, and first I'll draw out a margin at the top of my paper. And remember, I mentioned that the back will be 2 inches longer than the length of the front, so these 2 inches will be at the top of the pattern. So that's what I'm marking out right now, and I'll just rule it out, then place the front pattern at this point. So the back will be on fold, except if you just want to split it open or you want to shape in the back curve a little bit, but then I'll be leaving mine on fold when cutting on fabric. So I'll place the center front with the placket still folded in. Okay, that extra 2 inch on the front pattern at the center front, it's still folded, I haven't touched it. So I place the center front in alignment with the center back. So on the margin, I'll be marking out the neckline of the same 3.5 inches I used for the front and the shoulder of 7.5 inches, just like I did at the front. And I'll be dropping the shoulder at the back by 1 inch, the same thing I did for the front, and marking out the shoulder slants like so. And then for the depth of the back neckline, remember I said 1 inch is going to form part of the front. So for the back neckline depth, I need a neckline depth of half an inch, but then I'll be adding this 1 inch that will form part of the front neckline to it. So I marked out a back neckline depth of 1.5 inches. So I've created the curve for the back neckline. Next, I will cut this out. Once I'm done cutting out the back neckline and shoulder slant, I'll proceed to fold it such that it touches the edge of the front shoulder line. So I'm going to hold it down with a pin so I can reshape in the neckline. So if you can see this properly, you will notice that the edge of the neckline don't meet at the same point. So I'll mark out the new tip of the neckline for the back so that it can touch the tip of the front neckline. So that will mean reshaping here a little bit to cut out that small excess you can see right there. We'll also do the same thing at the tip of the shoulder. So I'll just use my ruler to extend the straight line so that I can cut out something straight there. So this modification is because of the slants. So these slants reposition the paper in such a way that they are no longer in alignment with each other. So I'm holding down this fold with a pin and trimming out the excess at the back neckline. Now the last modification we'll be doing for the back pattern is to create a dart. So remember, we don't have a dart at the front, but I'll be including a 1 inch wide waist dart for the back piece. So along the waistline there, I'll just extend and mark the waistline so that I can create the dart at the back piece. So because of the presence of the dart at the waist, I need to add an extra 1 inch at the back waistline. So that means reshaping the back along the waistline. Now the other part of this pattern remains the same, and I'll just proceed to cut out the back piece and we can create the dart. Note that I haven't added any sewing allowance. I'll be doing that when I place the pattern on fabric. Now I'm done cutting, and I'll just separate these two, open up the placket, that extra 2 inches at the center front. Now I'll be drawing out the waistline on the back pattern so I can create the dart. So the back pattern will be on fold when I'm cutting on fabric. Then I'll position the dart 4.5 inches away from the center back, and from this point I'll mark ½ an inch on both sides of the dart line. So this dart will extend 5 inches downward and 5 inches upward. Now I'll mark out 4.5 inches from the center back to this point, just to be sure to create a straight line. Now I've marked out the dart line, and I'm also drawing out the dart legs. This I'll be transferring to the fabric when cutting. Note how our shoulder slope looks here. That's the top of the shoulder, and this part will be part of the front. Okay, so now I'm done. I'll be making use of my basic sleeve. I have a tutorial which I'll be linking up and in the description box. You can go check it out to know how to cut a sleeve. So now we'll proceed to cut on fabric. So for the front, I'm making use of 2 fabrics, a plain black fabric and this print. So I'll be combining the both, using one for each side of the body. So I've laid the two together and I'm cutting the fabric adding 1/2 inch allowance at the hem of the shirt dress. So along the center front, that's the placket actually, I don't need any other allowance because I already factored in the sewing allowance as part of the 2 inches extension. So at the side of the dress, I'll be adding 1 inch sewing allowance and 1/2 inch on the other part. So I'm adding 1/2 inch along the armhole curve, along the shoulder slant, and along the neckline curve. Now here is a front piece. I'll just lay it aside so I can cut out the back. So I'll also be adding 1/2 inch at the neckline, the shoulder slant and armhole curve, and 1 inch along the side. So for the back, my fabric is on fold, that is, it is folded along the center back, so we're not splitting that part open. Okay, so I'll be placing a notch along that 1 inch fold, just so I don't miss it when joining that is actually the top of my shoulder. I just keep calling it a fold. If you know what it is called, please leave a comment in the comment section. Now I'm done cutting, and I'll just be using a pin to mark out the position of my darts so I don't need to start measuring before sewing. So once I have the pin in there, I'll raise up the paper so I can mark out the position of the darts and the apex of the darts. Now I'm using a chalk to mark it out so I can draw out the darts on fabric. I'll proceed to do the same thing on the other side of the back piece. So here we have it, all our fabric pieces ready to be sewn. You can see the dart line there, and here is the front piece with the front plackets. Here is the sleeve. I also made use of 2 fabric, the print for one side and the plain fabric for the other sleeve, and I proceeded to cut a band for the hem of the sleeve. With this, I'll be creating a turn up effect on the sleeve. I also cut this arrow shape fabric. I don't know what it is called. If you know what it is, please let me know in the comment section. So this I'll be using to turn up the band of the sleeve. And that's it with this video. Thank you very much for watching. Please be sure to watch the next video, which will be on the sewing of a shirt dress. I also have a tutorial on collar fixing. Thank you, and see you in the next video. Bye.